Hello, I'm Paula Blair, and this is Audiovisual Cultures, the podcast that explores and examines aspects of sound and image-based cultural production and their wider implications. I'm thrilled to be joined this time by Dr. Rebecca Harrison to talk about her research on technology and cinema through topics such as coding in the Star Wars franchise and cinema's relationship with railways. Thanks to Patreon members and everybody who's been engaging on social media, it's a really big help and you're very much appreciated. I'll be back after my chat with Rebecca with ways you can be part of the conversation and support the continuation of the podcast. Do enjoy the discussion. Pleased to be joined by Dr. Rebecca Harrison, who's joined us today from the University of Glasgow, and it's lecture in, is it theatre, film and television?
Film and television studies.
Becca is in Newcastle to give a talk about some of your Star Wars research. And like many academics, you've got many strings to your bow, but I think because of your talk, maybe we could start with your Star Wars research.
Broadly speaking, the Star Wars project is about what I'm calling computational cinema. So it's about the relationship between the digital and film, but rather than thinking about that in a theory of aesthetics way, I'm thinking more about the relationship between software and the production of software and the way that it's implemented in the film industry to produce film that is digital in its ontology or digitally circulated and distributed. Part of what I'm doing is thinking about the gendered and raced production of software and the ways that gender and race informs algorithms, coding, programming, and what that means for the film industry and what impact it has on the way that we see cinema and how it's presented to us. Star Wars makes a really good case study in this project because of its longevity and just how big the franchise is, and the fact that it starts, just at the point in 1977 when you get the first wireframe graphics appearing in film. So it's really the moment of change all the way up to now. And it goes through these cycles of the analogue referencing the digital to almost completely digital, and then now switching back to this. There's a kind of tension between the analogue and the digital in the newer films, with puppetry making a comeback. Some of the films are shot on 35mm, I think, and there's a mix of film in the material sense and the digital coming together. So it's a really interesting case study for thinking about a lot of these questions, and also because it's Star Wars, for thinking about the authorship of them and who gets to make decisions about labour practices and production practices and gender and race.
Is there then a lot of comparisons between the original trilogy and then, I suppose there's the original film which became a trilogy, and then the prequels, how you deal with that, and then what we're seeing now is there seems to be this new breed that's happening with Bad Robot and J.J. Abrams. Are there parallel waves then between the technologies and the gender politics?
Yeah, I mean, that's something I'm sort of really just trying to start thinking about. And there's not consistency across the Star Wars franchise at any given time because there are so many paratexts, and those paratexts are doing different things. But there's definitely patterns within the kind of Star Wars moment. So the 70s and 80s original trilogy, I say, using technology in a particular way, and the concerns of gender and race are being thought about and represented in a particular way, which is very, very different to what happens with the prequels in the late 90s and early 2000s.
Yeah.
That kind of millennial moment, which is actually far worse.
Yes, that's what I was thinking,
Yeah, it's gender and race politics. In the prequels that are just so much worse, which says actually quite a lot, I think, about the culture at the time.
Yes.
And that kind of post-feminist movement. Certainly now it's really interesting because, I mean, it's still a huge kind of major corporation. It's Disney. You can't really get away from that in terms of the politics. But they are taking steps to address some of those problems, which is where so much of the kind of trying to find a polite way to talk about the awful stuff that happens online and the kind of backlash, I guess, against having women actually speaking in the cast.
Anything.
Yeah, just doing anything, breathing, being on screen. It does seem like across all of the Star Wars texts at the moment, even if straight white men are dominating the action still, there is something more critical about that happening. And I think that that's in part because the Lucasfilm Story Group, which is the inner circle of people who control what becomes Star Wars canon narratives across the franchise, they are themselves a far more diverse group of people.
Yeah. Not not long ago, Andrew and I did a recording about Solo, a Star Wars story, and just to try and draw all of those ideas into one thing, just one example, I'm really terrible with remembering the names of the robots and stuff, but you know there's the robot in that voiced by Phoebe Waller-Bridge?
L3.
Because I was wondering what you made of her, because I worried that maybe there was, because she kind of almost starts a feminist uprising that's also a Marxist uprising, but I was wondering about the wide robot hips that she has, and is there something a bit racially stereotyping of maybe black women?
That's a really interesting question. I mean, I wrote a bit about the film when it came out, and I'm talking quite a lot about L3 in my paper today, actually.
Yeah.
Because I find that character just like totally fascinating. Particularly because L3 is a moment where all of these questions about gender, race and coding and programming all come together embodied in a character. I find the racial question about L3 really difficult. I kind of identify L3 as feminist because of the conversation on like droid rights and the way that what she's saying about droids is sort of maps onto feminist debates. And I thought the same when you see her walking. It is kind of coded in a racial way.
Yeah.
However, Phoebe Waller-Bridge is white and was doing motion capture for the film. So she was dressed in a way that we've imagined Andy Serkis doing this kind of work. So presumably, unless there's been some kind of significant alteration in post-production, that's mapping onto her movement. And I can't tell if that's about our preconceptions and about our kind of racial biases, or if it's something that they have deliberately done in the film. I can't tell, and it's difficult because you're sort of looking at a robot figure that doesn't actually exist, and to then think about like how would someone move and what would that look like if you turned it into that shape is quite difficult. It's definitely true that as a robot, though, she looks far more feminized in her appearance than the male robots are masculinized.
Yes.
She's not a kind of tiny robot sphere rolling around in the desert.
I got frustrated with Solo because I thought the more recent films had done a lot of really good work towards moving towards the right direction, and that one to me felt like it regressed a bit.
Yeah.
And also the really cool characters all got killed off pretty early, so she's one of them. L3 is one of those, and
along with
Sandy
Val,
Newton's character, I loved her, and that's that.
Also, finally a woman of colour, a black woman in a major speaking role in a Star Wars film, and then she's dead.
She's dead.
And I thought it was a total cop-out and a total waste of her character.
I thought that as well. I thought she was really underused, both of them.
One of the things that struck me, there's a line in that film, I think it's when they're about to do the Kessel Run, and they're in the Millennium Falcon, and I think it might be Han says, "We need to break free, this is pulling us around in circles." And I thought it was such a neat way of thinking about what the Disney era films are doing, because it feels like we've kind of we're beginning to move forward with The Force Awakens, to an extent with Rogue One. The Last Jedi had that kind of incredible female cast, even though it was actually not on screen as much as you thought any of the women were. But then and then we get to Solo, and then it feels like Disney were playing to the kind of white man-boy audience who have been critiquing all the other films. This was a kind of moment of, this is the film for you. The feminist droid dies, the woman of colour dies, they're eradicated from the narrative.
Yeah, it really annoyed me. I was glad I didn't see it in the cinema. I was glad I waited and just watched it at home. It
was frustrating because I didn't think overall as a film it was really a bad film. And it was quite enjoyable in lots of ways. And there were moments I really liked, but there's quite a clever callback actually to The Empire Strikes Back, which I rewatched recently. And there's a moment in that which I'd never made the connection before, where they're trying to escape Cloud City, and Lando is crouching behind one of the guns on the Millennium Falcon, and R2-D2 is moving towards them and like trying to get on the ship amid this huge kind of gunfight that's going on, and the Imperial stormtroopers are shooting at them. And it gave it this completely different emotional resonance, because now if you've seen Solo, that exact moment happens with L3 running towards the Millennium Falcon, Lando crouched behind the guns, and then she dies, and it's like so kind of emotionally
becomes meaningful for him.
So to now watch what was the earlier film, which comes later in the chronology, which is the joy of writing about Star Wars and trying to make this make sense to anyone reading it, it completely changed that scene in, I thought, quite a meaningful and pertinent and interesting way. So I don't think the film was completely without merit, and the way that it sits in the Star Wars canon is quite interesting. But it totally failed some of its women characters.
I think so. But it was just their relationship, though. There was a hint of something towards romance with them. I took it that they were making very light that she was convinced that Lando was obsessively in love with her, but she was deluded. And Andrew took it that he really was in in love with her. I thought that was part of the stereotype of the strong feminist person, and she's convinced this man loves her, but actually he's tolerating her. I thought maybe it was poking fun at that kind of stereotype. I think either way, there was quite a bit of sweetness in their relationship, and it had that banter that was very different from male banter.
Yeah. One of the Star Wars novels, which are not my kind of go-to bedtime reading, much as I love the films, they're actually really fascinating in some of the ways that they like develop some of the themes and stories from the films. One of the novels, Last Shot, which is sold as a Han and Lando story, and it's ostensibly about the two male characters, but it actually really is so much about L3.
Oh, really?
And it's set, I think it's set something like 4 years after Return of the Jedi, and it takes place in multiple timelines. So because there are these flashbacks to an earlier period of time, L3 features quite heavily. Her relationship with Lando in that is quite beautiful, actually, and she's given the space to talk about droids' ontology and the way that they learn, and the fact that they have personalities and a life, and the nature of artificial intelligence and some of the ethics around droid and human interactions. It's a really sweet relationship, and it's really instructive, and he kind of really listens to her.
Okay.
And then later on is reflecting on this. And there's a kind of real sort of sense of partnership between them. And he follows her lead as much as she follows his. And I think there's actually something, I've been thinking about this, and it's only really just occurred to me in the last day. So it's a slightly underdeveloped, underbaked line of thought. But there does seem to be something interesting that Star Wars is doing in its representation of relationships between, I'm kind of coding L3 as a white woman, just because of Phoebe Waller-Bridges, but between white women and men of colour. So in this novel, it's through various things that L3 and Lando do, they end up as a pair between them kind of saving the galaxy from being taken over by...
I'd like to see that film.
This kind of droid hierarchy. You know, I would have loved to have seen this film. Like, it was kind of upsetting to be reading it and thinking, like, oh my God, this would be so great, I would watch this. It would also save me reading a Star Wars novel. That was kind of interesting. And then I was thinking, but actually that kind of maps onto what they do in Rogue One, where you have a Latino man in the form of Cassian Andor and the white woman Jyn Erso, who both kind of eradicated from the narrative, but both saved the galaxy.
Yes.
It really makes me wonder what they're going to do with Rose in episode 9.
Yeah.
Because it seems like following that pattern, it will be a partnership of Rey and Finn, which is fine. Like, I'm all for Rey and Finn saving the galaxy. But it makes me wonder what they're going to do with Rose as a character, and how they're going to create space for her as a woman of colour to exist in that narrative.
And I thought Rose and Finn were a nice partnership. They really riffed off each other nicely in Last Jedi. She was my favourite character in that, I have to say. I mean, obviously the fails for Carrie Fisher, but Rose, I just loved her character.
And I think, she must have the most quoted line from that film as well. Don't fight what you hate, but save what you love.
Yeah.
Which you just see everywhere, and like slogans and people talking about the franchise and it being quoted and cited.
Within that, I suppose it's obvious you would look at those interrelationships then between the humans or humanoids and their robot characters. It's probably maybe going too much into it, thinking about the idea of the cyborg, but then it's not really the same, is it?
I think in one of the novels there is a character who barely features who's described as a cyborg.
Right.
But it doesn't really address in what way they're a cyborg. So as far as I know, there aren't any cyborgs, unless you count Luke and Vader.
Oh yes, yeah, so
because of course they have robotic. I mean, Vader is, I guess, actually Vader really is a cyborg, actually, isn't he? But never described that way.
But you don't see that, I think, because it's hidden under all the clothes. You don't really realise.
Yeah.
And isn't it revealed quite late on in the franchise that he's actually mostly bionic?
I suppose it depends which way round you view the chronology of the franchise. In terms of the release of the films, it's quite late, but in terms of the story arc, it's fairly early on. Even I still get totally confused about which timeline I'm talking about.
I suppose if we're talking about technology in Star Wars, we must mention the lightsaber for many reasons. The phallic object, the very obvious extendable phallic object. And the colour schemes, red seems to be the bad guys. Red in our real world means different things. Do you think it's coming from the red as in what communism is feared as in the United States? Because in a lot of countries red's very positive.
I'd not really thought that much about the colours of the lightsabers. I think they're meant to, in Star Wars mythology, you can't become a Jedi or presumably a Sith until you've made your own lightsaber. I think the feeling is that Rey, between either we will see it happen, I don't think you really see it in the other films. She will at some point between episode 8 and 9 have created her own lightsaber. So it's part of their, moving from their training to, it's basically getting their Jedi PhD, I guess. It's the difference between like studying for the PhD and being a doctor, is making your own lightsaber. And I think that they choose their colour. So I actually do at home have a mug that someone bought for me that's one of those ones where you pour the hot water in and the lightsabers will magically appear. And there are actually a surprising array of colours. So I think the red ones do tend to be the dark side characters, but there are purples and pinks and clear ones. So there's a kind of spectrum.
I'm not a fan. I've just enjoyed a couple of the newer ones, I think. Being in close proximity with Andrew, it was going to happen sooner or later that I'd watch all the films.
I still really don't like the prequels. And I've gone back to them and I've tried. I've tried to love them so much and I just can't.
I tried to watch the first one. Nope.
They look like kids' CGI animation films. Actually, one of the things that probably the only even vaguely interesting thing I have to say about actual lightsabers is that I feel like they're part of in thinking about them being like this kind of extendable phallic objects. There's work by an academic called Sadie Plant in which she talks about binary code and the gendering of binary code through zeros and ones.
Oh, right.
In which case we could think about women as representing zeros in the Freudian sense of thinking, like kind of empty vessels waiting to be filled, and then ones being the kind of masculine phallic object. And when you look at the iconography of Star Wars, it's really interesting that everything that is round and spherical and circular is a kind of storage device or contains information or kind of holds something within it. So when you look at the disc that Leia puts into R2-D2 to record her message, that's got a kind of a big circle on it. BB-8, who has the information put inside him, is circular. The Death Star and what was the awful name they gave it in The Force Awakens? Is it Starkiller Base? I almost want to say I'm wrong because it sounds really bad, but
probably right.
I think that's what it's called. And they contain things within them and contain citadels within them, but everything that's a kind of straight line is something that's kind of phallic and masculinized and cuts through things and destroys things. So lightsabers, the digital antenna on top of things which are transmitting information to round objects. You can almost see this kind of weird binary pattern which is gendered. I'm not quite sure where I'm going with that, but it kind of fascinates me.
Yeah, no, it's definitely worth thinking about. I suppose then thinking about your work more generally then on the relationship between technologies and different apparatuses and cinema. Do you want to tell us a bit about your really interesting work on trains and cinema?
Sure. It's quite nice to be asked about trains because everyone just talks to me about Star Wars. In fact, when I got asked to come and give this paper today, I said, would you like me to talk about railways and modernity or would you like me to talk about Star Wars and coding? They were like, do Star Wars. Quite like to do some more trains. That project was not dissimilar in its approach in that it was thinking about the intersections of different forms of media technology. So I was thinking about railways as media in that they mediate the experience of movement. I was looking at the period between 1895 and 1948 in Britain and really just exploring how the machines and apparatuses of cinema sat in relation to other technologies around them and how they were informed by the other kind of machinery of the Industrial Revolution, but also what it meant to sit in a cinema or to use a projector and how you might understand that based on having taken a train somewhere or having listened to a radio or any of the other kinds of things that were going on in that period.
I mean, I suppose there's so much to go into with the relationships between modes of transport in the modern period and the cinema. It's a modern art form, it's maybe the modern art form. I suppose the idea of the movement, speed, kineticism, the chemical reactions that have to happen to move it forward. Yeah, there's a lot of analogies between them.
Yeah, I think particularly with the railway and cinema, all of these media are changing the relationship that people have to time and space, which is, I guess, the key cultural shift that modernity brings about, that mechanisation makes happen. But to my mind, if you're sitting on a train or you're sitting in a cinema, you're being taken to a different space, but you're not actually moving.
Yes.
So there's this kind of weird relationship between simultaneously being static and yet mobile, and you're watching a landscape vicariously, so it's being mediated by a window and the machine that's moving you, or a screen and a machine that is moving. So there's always a way in which you're removed from the experience that you're having, even though you're being interpolated into that kind of world or space or thing that's happening in front of you.
I suppose it's inherently cinematic in a way, being on a train. If you're on a window seat, for example, you're watching the world go by at quite high speed, you're maybe 100 miles an hour, and this landscape's whizzing past you, or you can see out to the coast even though it's miles away.
There was a really strange and fascinating phenomenon on trains, mostly between the 1920s and probably around 1948, although there's kind of evidence of this thing happening all the way up into the 1980s, where they would put a cinema carriage on a train. And I mean, there's been different iterations of this, and you get the kind of Hales tours, which are the novelty cinema spaces that look like railway carriages in around 1908. But these are an actual cinema built into a carriage and attached to a train. They only run on the London and North Eastern Railway, or at least that's the only one where they have fee-paying customers who are passengers on the train, and it's a regular service. But what really, really fascinated me about it was that on a lot of these, they would show newsreels basically. I think they tried out showing silent films initially with no musical accompaniment. So that just sounds awful. Like, why would you do that? So eventually they have sound and you would watch newsreels, which seems far more logical.
Yeah.
And also it's the beginning of mobile, having news on the go.
Getting information while you're...
And you think about everyone now sitting with their tablets and their laptops and their mobiles and watching news and following social media on trains. It has this much earlier precedent.
Yeah.
But yeah, sometimes as part of these newsreels, they would show tourist films about places on the route that you were going. So you would sometimes be watching footage shot from a moving train along a railway line that was then being projected inside a blacked out railway carriage as you were moving through that same space. So you were seeing something that was already mediated by the railway, mediated through a camera, and then shown back to you on the train where you could just watch it in the first place, which just seems like a very convoluted way of engaging with the environment.
But then would it make people more likely to think, oh, I'd like to visit there, and actually get off the train, you know, at another journey? That would be cool to know.
As with all history, there's always those questions of like, why did no one write this down? I think unfortunately that kind of information is just gone, or was never recorded. But yeah, it's something like endlessly fascinating to me about the idea of watching a train journey on a film on the train journey, where you could just watch it as it was happening.
There's an Irish artist called Brian O'Doherty who said that to understand something we need to first mediate it. Maybe it's that kind of thing. Maybe you notice it more because it's on this screen that you're fixated with.
Yeah, and I guess that is actually asking for your attention, whereas if you were just sitting in a carriage, would you be looking out the window? Would you be reading a newspaper or a novel or having a conversation or eating your lunch? You know, there's, I guess, it's a way of making you look.
I didn't know that about screens being in a carriage.
Yeah, I think it's 1924 they first do this, in inverted commas, experiment. It's already started up in the US because obviously they have like much longer train routes than in the UK.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's already happening there, and obviously in Russia as well you have the phenomenon of having mobile cinemas. Although those ones would be, I think they tended to be cinemas in train carriages that would move around the country but would be static at the point of the screening, whereas these ones were watching while on the move.
While you're moving. Yeah, because it's become very normal on long haul flights and on ferry journeys, for example. They've got a little onboard cinema where it's built in the back of the seat in front of you on a plane, for example. But that idea of while you're moving on the ground very fast, that's very different, isn't it?
Yeah, and actually the train predates I suppose actually it's probably obvious, the train does predate the plane in terms of showing films, but only by 2 years. So I think it's 1926 you get the first.
Really?
Yeah, the first kind of recorded. I mean, I'm always a bit loath to say the first in film history because there's always one that came before that no one knows about. But yeah, the first one that we have documentation of at the moment was at one of the big World's Fairs in the US.
Gosh, you wouldn't think it though, that soon.
It was a huge phenomenon like in the 20s and 30s of how can we put screens into moving spaces. So boats, ships, trains, planes, all on the go.
Do you think it's a way of trying to perhaps pacify people?
I think actually at the time it was more about making a big statement and a way of proving innovation and modernity, particularly as around the 20s and 30s is when those different forms of transport really start to be competitive with one another, because they become, for example, the flights are still expensive and reasonably new in the public imagination, but it becomes possible to go to a commercial airline and take a flight. And that's precisely what ships don't want you to do. And the trains are losing out on their business to shipping companies who are now taking people abroad for less money, but they want the domestic holidays to still... So everyone's beginning to be more competitive.
Right.
And it's a way of saying, look at us, we're shiny and new, come and use our technology.
Wow.
Yes, the hidden world of screens on transport.
And then do you ever invert that? Do you go the other way and look at trains in film, or do anything meta like a train in a film on a train?
I do go that way actually in the project and think about what train transport looks like on screen.
Okay, yeah.
So in documentary form and in newsreels, but also in fiction films, which is a lot of fun because often those are detective stories or have big train wrecks in them, especially from like in the kind of 30s and 40s. You get all of the killing Nazis on trains films, which are quite fun. But yeah, I guess those films are kind of more specific to the exact moment of its release. I don't think there's anything generic to say about them. Actually, no, I say that they actually do quite things with the ways in which they represent women. Broadly speaking, all of those films have women characters who are doing some kind of work on the railway, even as a kind of in an amateur capacity. So you get lots of amateur women detectives who find themselves on trains. And the train journey becomes this transformative experience where they actually usually start out as quite autonomous, confident single women, and by the end of it they've been turned into these kind of good material for a wife. Seven Sinners does that. The Wrecker does that. The Lady Vanishes does it. Iris starts out at the beginning very set on her particular journey, and then over the course of that train ride she becomes the very submissive wifely figure. You also as well, you get the inverse of that. You get these professional criminal women. So in Hitchcock's, they're always Hitchcock films. Number 17.
Yes.
And what was the other one I was thinking of? Oh, Kate Plus 10, which is a film from the 30s, where the woman is a career criminal, and then again there's this transformative train journey that takes place, and then she ends up married to the detective who is investigating her. Usually having gone through some kind of, I think in Number 17 she's in the train wreck and she's about to drown and he saves her. It's almost like a baptism, and she emerges cleansed from the experience of near death to be a good little wife. So actually there is something quite interesting about the train on screen and women passengers.
Yes, and there's the very subtle going through a tunnel at some point at high speed.
That's the North by Northwest.
And
the other Hitchcock film I was thinking was The 39 Steps, which is Madeline Carroll, isn't it? And Robert?
Doris Day. What's the one Doris Day's in? Oh, that's Que Sera Sera, The
Man Who Knew Too Much.
Gosh, that's really fascinating stuff. Do you want to talk about the really cool things you're doing with teaching? I know you've been trying really hard to privilege a lot of women filmmakers and the labour of women in film, so it'd be really brilliant to hear more about that.
Yeah, it's been a kind of an ongoing project over the last 2 years to centre feminism and post-colonial thought discourse in undergraduate teaching on a core course rather than in optional modules. I mean, largely this is because it's based on my own experiences, the experiences of other women, people of colour around me, both in the workplace, in film criticism, in the film industry more broadly, and in the academy. And just thinking of what everyone's constantly saying, something needs to change. These are the attitudes that I'm still facing, not necessarily from students, but just from the other people that they work with, from the industry itself. Although I say that as if the industry itself isn't people. One of the ways that we somehow manage to devolve responsibility away from ourselves. Yeah, so really it was just a way of thinking about what has to change in order for things to get better. And to my mind, at least maybe the kind of optimism that I went into teaching with was that the classroom is a space where we can do a lot of this work. And I remember when I started doing this, I looked back at my own undergraduate course when I was learning, and I was, first year of undergraduate, 2005. And I've still got all of my course handbooks because I'm a terrible hoarder of academic bits of paper. And I looked at it and I was really struck by the fact that on a 20-week course there were only 3 films directed by women.
That's a lot compared to what
there were only 3, but they were all short experimental films in a week where we watched lots of films. I mean, I can't remember exactly what the total figure for all of the films were, but there were maybe 2 feature films by men of colour, and there were these 3 experimental shorts, and everything else was by a white man.
Yeah,
and I thought, this
yeah.
was 2005? That's not that long ago.
I know.
And then I started thinking, well, hang on, in like 15 years' time, someone's going to say, oh, well, it was only 2005, they did things differently then. And I'm not having that. Like, people,
Yeah.
it was amazing. I actually felt so, I mean, I loved all of my lecturers, don't get me wrong, but I just felt so let down by that.
Yeah, I know exactly how you feel, and I think your story is going to be echoed by a lot of us,
Yeah.
far and wide.
And I actually think, sadly, it's going to be echoed by students who are in classrooms right now.
Yeah.
So unless we start doing something to change it, instead of keep talking about things, this is my kind of mantra at the moment, like stop talking about doing things differently and be the difference. I think, it's all well and good if students take elective modules in feminism or gender in film, but then how many students are going through the whole time at university without ever having to engage with any of this thinking?
Yeah, because they don't want to deal with it. And you can do the whole being subtle and dropping it in there every now and again, but it's not appropriate. These are massive questions in the world right now.
I really resent the idea as well that we have to do this in a way that is subtle.
It's
I've been
covert,
told to maybe try doing this in a more subtle way because it won't agitate people so much. But I really resent the idea that talking about equality is something that we have to hide, because if you're having to hide it to make people, to get people on board with it, then they're not really engaging with it. They're actually just maybe going along with it because they don't know it's there. I mean, I co-teach. This is not something that's just me, and this is, in conversation with other people. It's by no means something that I've just done by myself in isolation. So I co-teach, and there's 2 of us always on the course, but the way we've designed it is to have everything on the course, pretty much everything on the course, directed by women. So it's a film and TV history module that can cover anything and everything, really. I mean, how you make selections to teach a 10-week course that covers all of film and TV history, you're already leaving out so much.
Of course.
So, I mean, you're always going to have to find an organisational logic that's always necessarily going to leave things out. What I've tried to do is to find ways to accommodate the kind of major moments in film and TV that people are usually say, if you say, oh, I'm teaching women's cinema. It's almost like that exists as a genre outside of the rest of history.
What does that even mean?
I mean...
Because that's going to mean different things to different people.
Yeah. And
it's women's pictures, the Douglas Sirk melodramas, for example.
Yeah.
So that's not what you mean by cinema made by women. And then films, say, directed or written by women, they're not necessarily feminist.
Yeah, I mean, and that's something that I've really enjoyed discussing with students on the course, is the moments where you watch something that was directed by a woman and sometimes they're kind of shocked that it's not feminist.
Yeah.
Or, for example, this year we watched Where Are My Children, which is a Lois Weber film from, I want to say 1915. I mean, it's actually one of the few films I've ever given a content warning about in advance of the screening, because it's a pro-contraceptive film, but only for some women, and it's anti-abortion in making arguments about using contraception.
Right.
And it's mostly pro-contraceptive so that poor working class women in poverty will not multiply and produce hundreds of children who create more problems for society. If you're a wealthy, white, middle class woman, then you should not use contraceptives or have abortions.
Breed like the clockers.
Yes. How dare you, sitting there with your feet up, think that you should not bear children for your husband. But I mean, it's at the same time, it's quite critical of the ways that men make decisions about women's bodies. And it was at the time considered fairly radical, woman-led film with what would have been more at the time considered feminist. So it's really interesting to get students to think about how that has changed, and also the fact that there are lots of flaws in a lot of feminist history that require more thinking, particularly on the part of middle-class white women. But I think it's like this kind of endlessly fascinating topic to think about all the ways that women engage in the film industry, what our preconceptions are. My kind of approach to it has been to teach what tend to be the big moments in film and TV history that I've taught in previous iterations of these kinds of survey courses. So there's early film, there's classical Hollywood, British wartime cinema, there might be some French New Wave. And you can do that entirely teaching films directed by women.
It can be done.
You can teach all of those aesthetics, you can teach all of those technological moments, you can teach all of it with films directed by women, and they don't have to exist in a little don't have to exist in a course over there that only 10 students are taking because you put women in the title. I think it's a really kind of positive it's really, really useful as well in terms of getting people to think about what do we mean by the film canon? Who creates it? What is our ideological approach in the classroom as teachers? And why are we not talking about that with students? And why are we not helping students to think about what their biases are and what their ideology is? Because we're constantly teaching them what ideology means and it belonging to other people. But isn't it important that they learn to reflect on their own way of thinking and ethics?
Becca, thank you so much.
No,
it's
thank
been
you
really
very much.
fascinating.
Yeah, it's been great to have a lovely conversation about film for an hour. Thank you.
You've been listening to Audiovisual Cultures with me, Paula Blair, and Rebecca Harrison. This episode was recorded and edited by Paula Blair, and the music is Common Ground by Airtone, licensed under Creative Commons Attribution 3.0 and downloaded from ccmixter.org. If you like the show, please support its production with donations to paypal.me/PEABLAIR or become a member on patreon.com/AVcultures. From as little as $1 a month on the Pay What You Can tier, patrons receive access to exclusive previews, extended show notes and video transcripts. Episodes are released every other Wednesday. Please do rate, share and subscribe on your chosen platform, as this helps others find the show. For more information and to see what any money received goes towards or how else you can be involved, visit audiovisualcultures.wordpress.com. To be part of the conversation, follow AV Cultures on Facebook and Twitter for updates and links to items relevant to the discussions. Thanks very much for listening. Catch you next time.